She had been dreaming about this day for years. The invitation had come quietly, tucked inside a plain envelope, but it carried the weight of everything she had worked for. It was a chance to perform at a prestigious hall, a place where musicians from all over the country had played, where critics and seasoned performers gathered to witness talent that was often extraordinary. She read the letter over and over, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. Her heart raced at the thought of walking onto that stage, but there was also a shadow of doubt, the kind that crept into the mind of anyone who had worked in silence for so long, waiting for recognition. She had spent countless hours at the piano, practicing until her fingers felt like they were part of the instrument. She loved the way music could travel through her, turning emotion into sound. Even though she was young and not widely known, her passion had always been enough to keep her going. She had performed at small local events, sometimes for people who hardly paid attention, but each time she had learned something new, refining her touch, her timing, her feeling for the music. The day she arrived at the hall, she was greeted by a mix of grandeur and intimidation. The building was enormous, with high ceilings that made her feel small. The polished wood and shining brass reflected the lights, creating an atmosphere that was both beautiful and slightly overwhelming. She walked slowly, her hands brushing against the railing, feeling the smoothness of the polished wood beneath her fingertips. Each step seemed to echo, reminding her that every action here mattered. She was led to the stage where the piano awaited. At first glance, it looked elegant, a grand instrument that promised brilliance. But as she approached, she realized it was not what she had expected. Some keys were sticking, others seemed loose, and the pedals did not respond as smoothly as they should. There were scratches on the surface, faint but noticeable, and the finish was dulled in places. The piano had character, certainly, but it was far from perfect. The event organizer, a well-meaning but practical person, leaned over and whispered, "Just keep it simple. Don't try anything fancy. This piano isn't in the best condition." The words hit her harder than she expected. It was not criticism of her talent, but the suggestion that her skill should be limited, tamed to fit the instrument. She nodded politely, but inside, a spark of determination lit up. If anything, this challenge made her more eager to find a way to make the piano sing. She sat down and ran her fingers lightly over the keys. Some responded immediately, giving her the clear, ringing sound she loved. Others were stubborn, producing dull or uneven tones. She played a few scales, listening carefully to the inconsistencies, feeling the resistance in her fingers and wrists. She could hear the notes fighting against her touch, but she also sensed the piano's hidden potential. Every instrument had a voice, she thought, and this one was no different. She just had to find it. After a few minutes, she stood and walked around the piano, examining it from all angles. She lifted the lid, checked the strings inside, and lightly pressed the pedals, testing their response. Each flaw became a puzzle to solve, a problem that demanded creativity rather than despair. She smiled to herself, thinking about the many times she had played on older, less than perfect instruments in her small town. Those experiences had taught her patience, attention to detail, and the ability to adapt. As the hours passed, she tried different techniques. She experimented with how hard or softly she pressed each key, how she moved her hands and fingers to coax sound from the stubborn notes. Sometimes she would play a chord and hear a note lag behind, but instead of being frustrated, she learned to adjust her timing, to let the piano's quirks become part of her music. She began to see patterns in the imperfection, rhythms that were hidden beneath the surface, waiting for someone to notice. During a short break, she stepped away from the piano and sat in a chair near the back of the hall. The space felt vast and almost empty, except for the faint hum of activity in other areas. She closed her eyes and remembered why she had chosen this path. Music was more than notes and technique. It was connection, emotion, expression. The piano, imperfect as it was, could still carry that, could still speak. She could still make people feel something real. A janitor who was quietly cleaning the stage approached her. He was an older man with gentle eyes and a kind smile. He had seen many musicians come and go, some brilliant, some less so, but he had a sense when someone had true dedication. "Don't worry too much about the piano," he said quietly. "It's not perfect, but that doesn't mean it can't sing. It just needs someone who listens." His words were simple, but they resonated deeply. She realized that listening to the instrument, to herself, to the moment, would be more important than any preconceived notion of perfection. She returned to the piano and began to play again. This time, she focused less on her anxiety or on the expectations of the audience, and more on the sound in front of her. She discovered a way to press the keys so that even the sticking ones produced a softer, pleasant tone. She found chords that resonated beautifully, even with the piano's uneven temperament. Slowly, she started to feel a rhythm emerge, a flow that was uniquely hers. Time passed quickly. What had begun as cautious experimentation turned into something more fluid. She played a melody she had composed herself, simple but full of feeling, letting the piano's quirks guide her choices. She realized that the advice to keep it simple wasn't a limitation. It was a challenge to find beauty in the essentials, to make the piano's voice the heart of the performance rather than overshadowing it with technical complexity. She paused, listening to the echo of the notes lingering in the high ceiling. There was a faint sense of triumph, quiet but undeniable. The piano, though flawed, had responded. She could feel its potential beneath her fingers, and she understood that this relationship between artist and instrument was what made music alive. It was a conversation, a delicate negotiation of strengths and weaknesses, patience and creativity. By evening, she had discovered several ways to navigate the piano's difficulties. She made notes on paper, small reminders about which keys required extra attention, which chords resonated more naturally. She practiced transitioning between sections smoothly, ensuring that the flow would feel effortless to an audience. She was aware that some might only see an imperfect piano, but she knew that the right approach could transform it. As she left the hall that night, the lights dimmed and the space quiet, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The first part of her journey was complete. She had faced the challenge head-on and found a path forward. There was still much work to be done, but she had discovered something important. The piano, no matter how difficult, had a voice, and she had begun to understand it. She walked out into the cool night, her mind alive with ideas, melodies, and the promise that tomorrow would bring the next step in turning imperfection into wonder. The next morning, she returned to the hall early, eager to continue exploring the piano. The air was crisp and quiet, carrying the faint smell of polished wood and dust. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the mixture of excitement and nervousness that always bubbled up before she played. The day ahead would be about experimentation and adaptation, learning to make the piano do more than it seemed capable of. She sat down and ran her fingers lightly across the keys. Some still resisted, but she felt more familiar with their behavior than the day before. She began with simple scales, carefully listening to each note. The keys that had stuck yesterday moved a little easier now, responding to her gentle pressure and precise timing. She noticed subtle differences in the sound each key produced, variations in tone and resonance. Instead of thinking of them as flaws, she began to see them as opportunities to create something unique. She tried small patterns, short sequences of notes, focusing on rhythm and timing. Sometimes a chord would sound slightly off, but she learned to adjust her fingers, pressing a bit earlier or softer, creating harmony from imperfection. She discovered that certain keys, when struck together, produced surprising warmth despite their uneven tone. It was like uncovering a hidden language, one that only she could understand. The piano was teaching her, and she was listening closely. She spent hours experimenting, moving her hands and body in different ways. She tried using her wrist to press some keys, fingers angled differently, and even subtle movements of the arm to change the weight on each note. Each adjustment revealed new possibilities. She felt a thrill every time a stubborn note responded beautifully, as if the piano were rewarding her patience and care. Between practice sessions, she walked around the hall, stretching her hands and legs. She noticed the echoes of her previous day's melodies lingering in the empty space. They reminded her that sound could fill even the quietest corners, that music was not just about playing notes but about presence and feeling. She thought about the people who would soon sit in those seats, unaware of the challenges she faced, ready to judge only the music they heard. That idea made her more determined to make every note count. She made a small notebook of observations, writing down which keys required special care and which chords worked best. She drew tiny diagrams to remember finger positions and noted changes in volume and pressure. Each entry was a small victory, a reminder that progress was happening even if it was slow. The piano was teaching her patience and creativity, qualities she knew would matter more than technical perfection on this stage. As the day progressed, she started experimenting with dynamics, pressing some keys gently to create soft, airy tones, and striking others with more force to produce louder, fuller sounds. She discovered that by combining soft and strong notes carefully, she could mask the piano's weaknesses and highlight its strengths. Her music began to take shape, a conversation between her and the instrument, with each imperfection adding character rather than distraction. She worked on transitions between notes and chords, making sure each shift felt natural. Some parts of the piano required extra attention, while others responded immediately to her touch. She practiced moving smoothly across the keys, imagining the flow of her music in front of an audience. Every mistake she corrected became part of the learning process, a lesson in flexibility and adaptation. Lunch came and went without much notice. She was too absorbed in the piano's responses. She ate a small sandwich while seated near the stage, listening to the faint sounds of her experiments echoing through the hall. Her mind was constantly analyzing, comparing yesterday's discoveries with today's, thinking of ways to improve. She felt alive in a way that only music could bring, fully present in the moment, aware of the connection between herself and the piano. In the afternoon, she focused on a piece she had composed herself. She had imagined it played on a perfect instrument, but now she had to adapt it to the piano's personality. She changed some notes, adjusted chords, and altered rhythm slightly to accommodate the piano's quirks. Each modification felt like sculpting, shaping the music until it fit the instrument rather than trying to force the instrument to fit the music. She discovered that these small changes often made the piece more expressive and unique than she had originally imagined. As the hours passed, her confidence grew. She could feel the piano responding to her touch in ways that surprised even her. She began to anticipate the way each key would sound, predicting the tone and resonance before striking it. This intuition gave her a sense of control, a partnership with the instrument rather than a battle against it. She realized that the piano's imperfections were not obstacles but tools to create a performance that no perfect instrument could replicate. A few people came in to check the stage and the instrument, curious about her progress. Some were skeptical, glancing at the worn keys and dented surface. She smiled politely and continued playing, letting the music speak for itself. She knew that what she was doing required patience and focus, not approval. The piano was responding to her dedication, and that was enough. As evening approached, she experimented with the pedals. They were stiff and unresponsive in some areas, but she discovered techniques to make them work more smoothly. Slight adjustments in foot placement, pressure, and timing allowed her to create the sustained notes she needed for certain passages. The piano, stubborn as it was, began to reveal hidden layers of sound, as if it were slowly trusting her. She also began experimenting with rhythm and tempo, testing how the piano responded to faster or slower movements. She found that some passages required her to slow down slightly, allowing the notes to speak fully, while others could be played more briskly to create contrast. She learned to listen carefully to the echoes in the hall, letting the space influence her choices. Music was not just about the piano. It was about the room, the sound, and the feeling it created for anyone listening. By the end of the day, she had made remarkable progress. The piano had transformed in her hands, revealing a voice that was hidden beneath its imperfections. She could play a full piece with expression and nuance, capturing emotion even with the instrument's challenges. She felt a sense of pride, not because she had conquered the piano, but because she had learned to work with it, to respect its limits and discover its strengths. She sat back for a moment, letting her hands rest on the keys. The sounds lingered, fading gently into silence. She thought about tomorrow when the audience would arrive, and she would have to translate her discoveries into a performance that could move people. She knew it would not be easy, but she also knew that the piano was ready to sing in her hands. All that was left was to find the courage to let it do so in front of others. As she left the hall, the last rays of the sun shone through the windows, casting long shadows across the stage. She felt a quiet excitement, a sense that she was on the edge of something extraordinary. The piano had given her more than sound. It had given her insight, patience, and the understanding that creativity often flourished in unexpected places. She walked home with her mind buzzing with ideas, melodies, and a growing confidence that she could turn challenge into wonder. The morning of the concert arrived with a mixture of excitement and tension in the air. She woke early, her mind already racing through melodies and finger movements. She had spent countless hours learning to coax music from the stubborn piano, but now the real challenge was about to begin. The hall would be filled with people, many of whom had high expectations, and the piano's flaws were now more than just a private puzzle. They would be on full display. She arrived at the venue while it was still quiet, the sun casting soft light across the entrance. The grandeur of the hall felt more intimidating than ever, the polished floors reflecting the early morning light, the seats waiting patiently for the audience that would soon fill them. She carried her sheet music, a small notebook of notes and reminders, and a quiet sense of determination. She knew the piano was ready. It was she who had to be brave enough to let it speak. Backstage, she checked the piano again. Its keys were exactly as she remembered, some sticky, some uneven, but she had learned how to handle each one. She ran her hands over the surface, feeling the familiar grooves and scratches, and let herself take a deep breath. The room behind the stage was alive with quiet activity. Stagehands setting up, musicians tuning their instruments, organizers moving swiftly from one task to another. She stayed in her own bubble, focusing on the connection she had built with the piano. Her mind drifted briefly to the people who would soon be sitting in the audience. Critics, professional musicians, and ordinary music lovers alike would judge her performance. She felt a wave of nerves, but she reminded herself that her music was more than technical skill. It was emotion, expression, and a story told through sound. She had practiced for this moment, adapting to the piano, learning to make it speak even when it seemed impossible. The challenge was daunting, but she had faced it with patience and care. The soundcheck began, and she played a few simple notes, letting the hall absorb the echoes. The acoustics were different from what she had imagined. The high ceilings made some notes linger longer, while others seemed to disappear quickly. She adjusted her touch accordingly, testing volume and timing, practicing the flow of her movements. Each adjustment brought her closer to a sense of comfort, a feeling that she and the piano were ready to perform together. She noticed other performers moving around, tuning their instruments, chatting quietly, and she felt a subtle mix of envy and admiration. Many of them had perfect, well-maintained instruments at their disposal. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that her strength lay not in perfection, but in adaptability and creativity. She had learned to turn limitation into opportunity, and now it was time to see if that would be enough. As the minutes passed, the hall began to fill with the audience. She could hear footsteps, murmurs, and the soft rustle of programs being opened. Her heart beat faster, a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She adjusted her music sheets, straightened her posture, and ran her fingers lightly over the keys once more. The piano responded with familiar tones, some slightly uneven but all full of character. She smiled to herself, grateful for the trust she had built between her and the instrument. The lights dimmed slightly, signaling that the concert was about to begin. She heard the applause of the audience welcoming the first performers and felt a knot of nervousness tighten in her stomach. She reminded herself that this was not about showing off, but about sharing music in its truest form. She focused on her breathing, slowing it, letting her fingers remember everything they had learned over the past days of practice. Finally, it was her turn. She stepped onto the stage, feeling the polished floor beneath her feet, and approached the piano. The applause was polite but attentive, a reminder that she was being watched. She took a seat, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands lightly on the keys. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath along with her. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself, and let her fingers find their place. She began with a simple, gentle melody, letting the notes flow naturally, without forcing them. The sticky keys responded carefully to her touch, and she navigated the uneven tones with the techniques she had practiced. The audience listened quietly, some leaning forward, some closing their eyes, letting the sound fill the space. She could feel the piano beginning to resonate with her, each note connecting with the next, creating a smooth, flowing line of music. As she continued, she allowed herself to explore slightly more complex passages. She adjusted her timing, pressing certain keys a little earlier or softer to create harmony despite the piano's flaws. Her body moved with the rhythm, fingers dancing across the keys, occasionally pausing to let a note linger. She felt a growing sense of confidence, a connection not only with the piano but with the space around her. The hall seemed to embrace the sound, amplifying the beauty she was coaxing from the instrument. She noticed the audience reacting in small ways, slight nods, attentive expressions, and the occasional tear in someone's eye. These subtle signals gave her energy, encouraging her to explore further. She had learned to listen to the piano, and now she was also listening to the people hearing it, letting their response guide her interpretation. Music had always been about connection, and in this moment, it felt as though the piano, the hall, and the audience were all part of the same conversation. A brief moment of tension arrived when a particularly stubborn key refused to sound as intended. She paused for a split second, smiled to herself, and adjusted her hand. Instead of letting it disrupt her performance, she incorporated it into the rhythm, turning what could have been a flaw into a unique musical expression. The audience likely did not notice the imperfection, only the beauty of the melody flowing seamlessly. Her confidence grew with each passing measure. She began experimenting subtly with dynamics, varying the volume of notes to add emotion and texture. The soft passages were delicate, almost whispering, while the stronger notes carried weight and power. The piano, though imperfect, responded beautifully to her touch. She realized that her connection with it allowed her to transcend its limitations, creating music that felt alive and moving. Time seemed to stretch and contract as she played, each note carrying intention and feeling. She had entered a state of flow, where her focus was absolute and every movement felt natural. The music became an extension of herself, a language that conveyed emotion without words. She felt a quiet joy, a sense of wonder at what could be achieved when patience, practice, and creativity came together. The audience, now fully immersed, remained silent except for the music itself. She noticed the expressions of those watching, the way their attention sharpened with each passage. Some seemed surprised, others moved, and a few whispered to their neighbors in awe. She understood that this was the true measure of her performance, not technical perfection, but the ability to move and connect with people. As she approached the final section of her piece, she felt a surge of determination. She had prepared for this moment, adapted to the piano's quirks, and connected deeply with the instrument. She played the closing notes with intention, letting them resonate fully, allowing each sound to linger in the hall. The last chord held, echoing gently, and she waited, feeling the silence that followed, the breath of the room catching along with her own. When the audience finally erupted into applause, it was overwhelming. Standing ovation, cheers, and claps filled the hall. She smiled quietly, a mixture of relief, pride, and joy flooding through her. She had faced the challenge, navigated the imperfections, and shared music that touched people. The piano had sung in her hands, revealing beauty that no perfect instrument could have conveyed alone. After the performance, she stood, taking a moment to acknowledge the audience's response. Backstage, organizers and fellow performers offered congratulations, expressing surprise at the artistry she had achieved with such a difficult instrument. Critics approached, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others praising her ingenuity and sensitivity. She accepted their words graciously, but her focus remained on the piano, which had been her true partner in creating this experience. That night, as she walked home, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. The day had been long and challenging, but she had discovered something profound. Music was not about perfection. It was about connection, adaptation, and the courage to turn limitation into expression. The piano, flawed yet full of potential, had taught her lessons that went far beyond technique. She understood now that true artistry came from listening, patience, and the willingness to embrace challenges. And in that understanding, she had found wonder. The applause from the first few notes had given her confidence, but now she was entering the heart of the performance. She allowed herself to explore the piano's full range, letting her fingers move freely while still respecting the quirks of the instrument. Each key she pressed had its own personality, and she listened carefully to how they responded, adjusting her touch and timing to create harmony. What others might have seen as flaws became essential to the texture of the music she was creating. She began to experiment with dynamics more boldly. Some notes she played softly, almost like a whisper, while others rang with full volume. The unevenness of the piano gave these shifts a special character, a natural ebb and flow that enhanced the emotion of the piece. She noticed the audience leaning forward, absorbed in the sound. Some had closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others had smiles or subtle nods, caught by the unexpected beauty emerging from what had once seemed a stubborn instrument. The piano, once a source of anxiety, was now a partner. It responded to her in ways she had discovered through days of practice and patient listening. She allowed herself to be playful, incorporating little improvisations that fit the piano's idiosyncrasies. A key that tended to stick became a rhythmic element. A slightly off note became a harmonic accent. She was no longer fighting the instrument. She was dancing with it, and the audience was beginning to notice. She had composed the piece to be expressive, but now the performance was evolving beyond her original plan. The imperfections of the piano created textures she had not anticipated, enriching the music. She allowed the moment to guide her, listening to the sound as it resonated through the hall, adjusting her hands, fingers, and body to follow the instrument's voice. Each variation added depth, emotion, and life to the performance. There were moments when the piano resisted, when a note would sound dull or a chord felt heavy. She responded with subtle shifts, pressing lighter, slowing slightly, or adjusting the hand angle. These small adjustments, born from patience and attention, transformed potential mistakes into features of the piece. She realized that true artistry was not about perfection, but about finding beauty in imperfection and expressing it fully. The audience began to react more visibly. Soft gasps, small sighs, and widened eyes marked the impact of the music. They were no longer just listening, they were experiencing the piano in a way that felt alive. She saw people holding their breath during particularly delicate passages, and she felt a thrill of connection. This was why she played, why she had spent countless hours practicing and adapting. Music could move people, even when it came from an instrument that many would have considered unusable. She allowed herself to take risks, moving through faster passages and more complex sequences. The piano, once unpredictable, responded with surprising cooperation. Each success reinforced her confidence, and each challenge inspired creativity. She leaned into the instrument's unique qualities, making choices that she knew would work in harmony with its personality. The audience, caught up in the unfolding performance, seemed unaware of the technical struggles that had taken place in private. All they could perceive was the beauty and emotion. As she continued, she explored the lower register, letting the deeper notes resonate fully. The piano's bass had some unevenness, but she adjusted her timing to create a rolling, rich sound. The higher notes shimmered above, dancing lightly, giving the music a sense of balance and depth. She felt the hall itself become part of the performance, the echoes and reverberations adding warmth and fullness. Each chord, each note, was alive, carrying her expression to everyone listening. She moved seamlessly between sections, alternating between calm, reflective passages and more energetic, expressive ones. The piano's quirks became integral to the piece, shaping the rhythm and flow. She had learned that adapting to the instrument required flexibility and presence, and now she could play intuitively, letting the music unfold naturally. The audience could sense this, responding not only to the notes but to the sense of honesty and emotion embedded in the performance. Some sections required careful attention to sustain, where she had to use the pedals with precision. The pedals were not perfect, and she had to modify her technique slightly to achieve the desired resonance. She used small adjustments, balancing weight and timing, allowing the notes to linger without becoming muddy. These subtleties added depth to the music, and she felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that she was transforming potential flaws into expressive elements. She experimented with pauses and silence, letting certain moments breathe. The piano's uneven tone gave these pauses more meaning, highlighting the contrast between sound and quiet. She could feel the audience responding, leaning in, attentive, waiting for the next note. This interplay between music and space, sound and silence, created a dynamic experience that went beyond simple performance. The piano, her careful adaptation, and her sensitivity to the moment had created something remarkable. Time seemed to stretch as she played. Each phrase felt deliberate and alive, each note infused with emotion. She could feel the story of the music unfolding, one that spoke of challenge, perseverance, and transformation. The audience was no longer just listening. They were part of the experience, absorbed in the magic that had emerged from an instrument many would have dismissed as broken. She reached the climax of the piece, allowing her hands to move more freely, more expressively. The piano, now fully engaged in the performance, resonated with a rich, vibrant sound. The unevenness of some keys added character, unexpected beauty, and depth. She could feel the energy in the hall, the connection between herself, the piano, and the audience. Every note carried intention, and the music flowed with a sense of wonder. As she moved toward the final passage, she played with deliberate care, emphasizing the most beautiful tones and letting them linger. She knew the ending had to leave an impression, a lasting sense of emotion. The final chord struck, held, and resonated through the hall. She paused, letting the silence follow the sound, allowing it to settle in the minds and hearts of the listeners. The audience erupted into applause, a wave of sound and excitement that filled the space. She smiled quietly, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. She had faced the challenge of the imperfect piano and turned it into a performance that captivated and moved people. The applause was not just for her skill, but for her ability to listen, adapt, and create something extraordinary from limitation. Backstage, she was met with congratulations from organizers and fellow musicians. Critics approached, expressing surprise and admiration for the ingenuity and emotion she had brought to the piano. She accepted their praise gracefully, but her thoughts were on the instrument that had made it possible. It had been a partner, a teacher, and now, through her care and creativity, it had sung in a way no one had expected. That evening, as she walked home, the experience replayed in her mind. She reflected on the journey, from discovering the piano's quirks to learning to work with them, to the performance that had transformed limitation into wonder. She understood now that true artistry was not about perfection, but about connection, adaptability, and the courage to embrace challenges. The piano had revealed its voice, and in doing so, it had allowed her to share something profoundly human and moving. The final applause had barely settled when she felt a wave of relief and joy wash over her. She had poured herself into the piano, navigated its imperfections, and created music that moved people in ways she had only imagined. Standing there on the stage, she realized that every moment of doubt, every sticky key, and every sleepless night had led to this moment. The piano, once a source of anxiety, had become an instrument of wonder. Backstage, organizers and fellow musicians approached her, congratulating her on a performance that had exceeded every expectation. They spoke of the emotion in her playing, the ingenuity with which she had handled the difficult piano, and the way the audience had been completely captivated. She smiled, accepting their words with quiet gratitude, but her mind kept returning to the piano. It had been her silent partner, her teacher, and the source of the magic the crowd had witnessed. The critics were equally amazed. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others took notes rapidly, but all recognized the creativity, patience, and emotion that had gone into the performance. Many commented on how unusual it was for a pianist to turn a flawed instrument into a source of beauty, and they praised her ability to adapt and innovate. She listened politely, feeling proud but also humbled. The true reward was not the praise or the applause, but the knowledge that she had uncovered something extraordinary with her own hands and intuition. After the concert, she lingered near the piano, running her fingers gently over the keys. Each note carried a memory of her journey, the late-night practices, the adjustments, the experiments, and the quiet moments of discovery. She felt a connection not only to the instrument but to the music itself, a bond that could not be described in words. She had learned to listen deeply, to respond with patience and creativity, and to embrace imperfection as a pathway to beauty. As she stepped away from the stage and walked through the hall, she noticed the audience still lingering, some taking quiet photos, others talking in hushed tones about the performance. She realized that the impact of her music went beyond technique. It had touched hearts, sparked inspiration, and left a lasting impression. The piano had not only made music but had told a story of perseverance, adaptation, and wonder. In the days that followed, she received letters, messages, and invitations from people who had witnessed the performance. Many spoke of the emotion and inspiration they felt, describing how the music had moved them in ways they could not explain. Some were musicians themselves, eager to learn how she had achieved such expression with an imperfect instrument. Others were simply listeners, grateful for the experience that had touched them deeply. Each message reinforced what she had already known. Music was about connection, and she had succeeded in creating a profound one. She returned to her own piano at home, now seeing it with new eyes. Every instrument had a voice, she realized, and it was up to the musician to listen and bring that voice to life. She played slowly, experimenting with new melodies, adapting to the quirks and strengths of her own piano. Each note felt richer, each chord more expressive, and she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The performance had taught her that true artistry came not from perfection, but from understanding, patience, and the courage to embrace challenges. Her confidence grew, and she began to consider new opportunities. Invitations to perform at other venues arrived, and she found herself in demand, not only for her skill but for her ability to create beauty from difficulty. She approached each opportunity with the same mindset: listen, adapt, and let the music speak. The lesson of the unplayable piano had become a guiding principle, shaping her approach to music, performance, and life. She also took time to reflect on the journey itself. From the moment she had first sat at the difficult piano, she had been forced to slow down, to observe, to experiment, and to listen carefully. These skills had carried her through the performance, and they were skills she would carry with her always. She realized that the piano's imperfections had been gifts in disguise, teaching her resilience, creativity, and the importance of finding wonder in unexpected places. One evening, she returned to the hall where the performance had taken place. The piano was still there, silent but ready. She ran her fingers lightly across the keys, smiling at the familiar resistance and tone. It had become more than just an instrument. It was a reminder of the moment she had turned limitation into beauty. She imagined the audience, the applause, and the feeling of music filling the space, and she felt a sense of peace and accomplishment. Her journey with that piano had also changed the way she approached life. She began to see challenges not as obstacles, but as opportunities to discover new paths and solutions. She learned that patience, creativity, and persistence could transform even the most difficult situations into moments of wonder. The piano had shown her that imperfection was not the enemy, but a companion in the pursuit of beauty and meaning. Over time, her story spread. Musicians and music lovers shared the tale of how she had taken an unplayable piano and made it sing, inspiring others to approach their own challenges with curiosity and determination. She became known not just for her skill, but for her insight and ability to find wonder in unexpected places. People admired her not only for what she could play, but for how she had approached the problem with grace and ingenuity. She continued to perform, but the lessons from that piano remained with her. Every time she encountered a new instrument, she approached it with curiosity and patience, listening closely and adapting to its voice. Each performance became an exploration, a conversation between herself and the instrument, with the audience invited to witness the unfolding of something beautiful and alive. The sense of wonder that had emerged from the first difficult piano became the heart of her artistry. In quiet moments, she would reflect on the journey, remembering the long nights of practice, the experiments with keys and pedals, and the thrill of discovering the piano's hidden potential. She understood that the true magic had not been in the notes themselves, but in the connection, creativity, and courage she had brought to the challenge. The unplayable piano had become a symbol of what was possible when one embraced imperfection and listened deeply. Years later, she would look back on that performance as a turning point. It had shaped not only her career but her approach to life and music. She had learned to trust herself, to find beauty where others might see only difficulty, and to create wonder through patience and dedication. The piano had taught her more than she could have imagined, and in turn, she had shown the world that even the most unlikely instrument could sing if one listened closely and played with heart. The story of that performance remained alive in her mind, a constant reminder of what could be achieved with determination, creativity, and a willingness to embrace challenges. She knew that every new piece of music, every audience, and every piano would present its own difficulties. But she also knew that within those challenges lay the potential for beauty and wonder. She had learned to see the world in this way, and the lesson would guide her for the rest of her life. And so, with each note she played, she carried the memory of that difficult piano, the lessons it had taught her, and the joy of creating something extraordinary from imperfection. The applause, the recognition, and the admiration of the audience were meaningful, but what mattered most was the discovery she had made. That music, patience, and courage could turn even the most unlikely situations into moments of pure wonder. The piano had sung, and in its song she had found herself.